This is Unit 1 of Earth Science, and I'm Mrs. Hell. During this unit, we are going to talk about the steps of the scientific method. We're going to talk about how it's used in society, and we're going to talk about the major branches of earth science. The scientific method, that's something you probably hear a lot about. So what is it? Well, it basically is a series of steps that scientists use to answer questions and solve problems. They don't always use the steps in order, but these are just different things that scientists do at different times to be able to solve problems, and that's what science is really all about. The first step of the scientific method is you're going to state the problem. So obviously you have to identify a problem in order to try to solve it. So a scientist at this step identifies the question or subject that they want to study. And believe me, there's many of those. And then you have to gather information about the subject. You want to know what other people have done, what's exactly going on. So you basically do research at this point. You can do that with the library, internet, encyclopedia, television. You can do that by interviewing other scientists. So there's a lot of different ways to gather information. Once you gather the information and you become educated about this topic, you can come up with a guess about how to solve it. Usually if you have a hypothesis, you have the words if and then in there. So if I get too much, then I will get sick. Or if I eat vegetables, then I will not get cancer. So this is just basically your best guess based on your research that you've done. Now, you want to go ahead, the next step is going to be to test your hypothesis. Scientists develop a way to test their hypothesis. So, when you set up an experiment, you have to make sure that you only have one variable. So, there's two types of variables. There's what's known as an independent variable. This is the part of the experiment that can be changed or controlled. And then there's the dependent variable, the thing that is measured in the experiment. For example, let's say that I wanted to do an experiment on whether or not boys or girls can blow bigger bubbles. Okay, so the independent variable would be the thing that's being changed. That's the gender, whether it's a boy or a girl, right? The dependent variable is what we're measuring. We're measuring the size of the bubble. Okay, so those are two types of variables. Now, in the experiment, I also have to have a control, right? Because if I give the boys a really large piece of gum and the girls a really small piece of gum, and then the boys end up blowing the bigger bubble, well, how do I know if it's because they're boys or if it's because they had the bigger gum? So you also have to have controls in an experiment. You have to make sure that you only have one variable, because if you're changing many different things, then you're not really sure what the change was caused by. And so that's important when you're performing an experiment. And once you're done, you're going to analyze the data that you have gotten from your experiment, and then you're going to come up with a conclusion. And the coolest thing about science is there's not always a yes or no answer, but you always gain new information when you're doing studies. So at this point, after you've done your experiment, if your hypothesis was correct, then you can go ahead and collaborate with other scientists, or maybe you want to do different types of experiments to go ahead and support your hypothesis. Or if your hypothesis was not correct, you can just go back and do another type of experiment or come up with a new hypothesis. So at the end, scientists are really never done, because usually the research and the information that you've gathered is going to lead to something else. Okay, so here's just kind of a little review. What part of the scientific method is it? Number 1, why does the rattlesnake follow the trail of the bitten mouse? That's going to be basically the problem, right? You're asking a question. This is what you're doing your study on. Okay, you want to find out, why is it that a rattlesnake follows the trail of the bitten mouse? Does he smell the blood? Does he see the blood? Why is he following it? Number 2, it appears as if the rattlesnake follows the smell of its own venom. So that would be your conclusion. After all of your experiment, you figured this out. Oh, he's following his venom. Number 3, to test his ideas, the scientist had the rattlesnake bite the mouse and watched what it would do next. So obviously that's going to be the experiment, right? Because you're testing it. The scientist guessed that the snake could smell its own venom in the mouse. So if a scientist is guessing, then he's making a hypothesis. So that would be number 4. Okay, so enough about the scientific method. Let's talk a little bit about different types of science. So there's actually 5 main branches of science. There's geology, oceanography, meteorology, astronomy, and environmental science. Alright, so in geology, and I've taken many geology classes, believe me, geologists have an exciting job. They actually study rocks and the composition of the earth. So this can be things like earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, anything that involves rocks and the composition of the earth. A lot of times geologists will get jobs working in the oil industry because they're doing oil exploration, and that's a pretty good job. Alright, the second type is oceanography, and I've heard so many kids tell me that this is what they want to be. So this is a very sought after career. Oceanographers study the effect of tides, waves, and currents in the ocean. And they also can study, if you want to be a marine biologist, which is kind of a little bit different than an oceanographer, you can study the biology of the ocean, so the animals in the ocean, and things like that. Meteorology. Meteorologists do not study meteors or outer space, right? They study weather and climate. They look at weather charts to analyze trends and predict future weather. They also are doing a lot of study on the climate change that's taking place in our Earth. Astronomers study stars and objects in outer space, which I think would be a really neat job. And then environmental scientists study the environment and everything in it. They study plants and animals, how they interact. They deal with pollution and things like that. And of course, we're studying earth science. So earth scientists can be any kind of scientists that study anything that happens on Earth. There's so many different parts to earth science. But it's mostly important that we understand Earth's structure. Alright, well that's it for the Unit 1. If you have questions about this material, please email me or you can call me. Thanks.